Hi there, in this video we are going to look at a piece of software called FTK Imager. FTK Imager is used to create um, duplicate copies really of any evidence that has been seized as part of a police or criminal operation, not criminal operation, but like an investigation. So what we're going to look at here is how you would take FTK Imager and you would use it to make a duplicate copy of a device or a drive that you may have temporary access to as part of the evidence sort of gathering process. So what you need to do is once you've signed out your USB drive or device or whatever it is, following the chain of custody document, then you can plug it in using a write blocker so that it prevents it from being overwritten, and then we're going to create a disk image from it. So when we click on create a disk image, we get the option to select a physical drive, which is sometimes quite useful, or a logical drive, image file, contents of a folder, or a Fernico device. If we go for physical drive, I'll show you what this means. So what this does, this picks up all of the devices that are connected to the computer system currently. So it defaults to the physical drive 0, which is your boot drive. So it'll be your C drive usually. But that could also potentially have any number of logical drive letters inside them. So it could be your C drive and your D drive and your E drive. So that's one device. The second device that's in the list is something we've currently got plugged into the USB port, which is a USB drive. So I could select that if that was the evidence that I had plugged in. If you're not sure, you can always look at logical drive, because what logical drive does is it pulls up the name of the drive. So if you plugged in something that had a particular name, then it would come up. So the other useful thing for the logical drive menu is that it will also show you the file system, which is usually useful when you're writing your report. So the E drive, which is the pen drive I've got plugged in, is formatted as FAT32. So whichever you use, physical or logical, as long as you've got the right drive, you'll be fine. We're going to select our destination. We're always going to create an EO1 file. It's an evidence file. And then case number, usually 1 and 1, because we're not really dealing with too many devices here. The unique description, so it would be the USB drive. The examiner would be your name, and then any notes that you want to put on. Okay, the image destination folder, well, we set things up in desktop, so I've made an FTK folder on the desktop, and the image file name I'll say is USB. Now I'm just going to put an underscore there, but that's only because I've made it already, and I'm going to cheat slightly rather than waiting 5 minutes. So when I click finish, we've got some final options. Now by default, I think it's just verifying the images after they're created that is selected. I like ticking this box, which shows you how long you've got to go, but don't worry if you don't do it. When you're ready, you click start, and it's going to start the process. Now, as you can see here, it's going to take 5 minutes roughly for this image to be created. It's a 4 gig USB. It's looking at every single 0 and 1 on it and trying to represent that in an evidence file. So I'm just going to click cancel, pretending that it's finished. So let's look at what we created. So once we've created an image file, you'll get a success message. But what I always think is important before you move on to the next step is to add the evidence item into FTK. So you can add the image file, and the source path will be in that FTK folder. So you can see that it's started to build the evidence file for that USB underscore that we just stopped. But I've already made USB file earlier. Now it's got a couple of things here. It's got 3 parts. So that's usually when it goes beyond a certain size. So USB EO1 is the first file, and then it's got EO2 and EO3 there, which we might want to make sure is compressed together, or it's transmitted to whatever we're looking at for future reference. It's also got a text file, which I'll talk about in a second. So I'm going to load up the EO1 file, hit finish, and immediately you'll see a hex editor appear on the screen down here. And top left, the evidence tree is important, because if we just click on the pluses for well, when they appear, you'll see the drive name appear. And then if we go into root, you can see that that's a list of the files that I've got on the pen drive, because this is the pen drive that I'm using to transfer my assessments home, and the files, the applications that I need to show you in the videos. So we've got our EO1 files from the other EO1 files that were generated. So it's like Inception. But you can see there that it's taken a note of all the files and folder structures on the drive, but then it goes into greater detail and actually stores those files in evidence with a point in time, so you can go back and you can analyze it later on. Now, checking this is important, because if you have any errors when you load it into OS Forensics later on, at least you know that the file was created properly by FTK Imager. It maybe hasn't been saved properly, so maybe there could be some clashes. It sometimes happens when OneDrive gets involved, it starts to sync, and when it starts to synchronize, yeah, weird things happen, and you might start to get errors when you try and load it into OS Forensics. But most of the time, touch wood, it does work. Okay, so we're happy that this evidence file has been created. So now what I would do is I would take the USB drive out of the sort of the Digital Forensic Investigator laptop that I'm using, and I would unplug the USB drive from the write blocker that I was using to stop it from being accidentally altered in some way, and then I'd pop it back in its Faraday bag and sign it back into evidence via the chain of custody document. And that way, I'm keeping everything, logged, everything sort of legal and valid, so that if it comes to court in the future, there's no way that this evidence could get thrown out, because I've followed that chain of custody document, I've followed the due process. So that's enough for now. Hopefully this has helped you get started by imaging your evidence that you've gathered, and you can use that in OS Forensics to analyze it for any useful information later.